Hey everyone, it's Battick from Daydream Nation. And everyone likes a super panel show, don't they? Well, I have got the super panel show for you. Today, we are going to pick our favourite guitar duos. Could be in hard rock, heavy metal, pop, new wave, all genres considered. So I've assembled a super panel of guests. Bicyclelegs from Bicylelegs Talks Music. G'day, mate. Mike Ladano,
Yes.
my mate from Canada, from Grab a Stack of Rock. Reed Little from Texas and the Contrarians. Hello, mate. Parish of Rock from the UK. And not forgetting Brandon Battick from Disturbing the Priest. So today we're just going to go around the grounds. We're going to pick our favourite guitar duos, all genres considered. So I think I'll throw it to you, Bicyclelegs, to start us off. What's your first pick?
I actually found this one a bit of a challenge, Peter, because when I was going through it, I realized that a lot of bands I listen to and a lot of bands I really like only have one guitar player. So, like a lot of the new wave music that I listen to and a lot of the progressive rock that I listen to and things like that, often they only have one guitar player. So I did find this one a bit of a challenge, but I was able to come up with some good examples, I think, and hopefully ones that are a little bit off the beaten path. My first one is a progressive rock band. They were around from the late 60s into the mid 70s, and then they broke up, supposedly never to reform again, but then they did reform in the early 80s. Now, they were originally a band that only had one guitar player, but when they reformed in the early 80s, the leader of this band brought in a second guitar player. And I'm, of course, talking about King Crimson. And in particular, the 80s King Crimson with Robert Fripp and Adrian Belew. And, this is the first album that they did together, and I think it's probably the best example, although they would do albums throughout the 80s and then into the 90s and into the 2000s with the Belew and Fripp lineup and various other bass players and drummers. But what I love about the dual guitars on this album and on this version of the band generally is the way that they interweave with each other. And, this isn't just about dueling lead guitars, although there's plenty of that too. You take the first song on this album, Elephant Talk, there are two guitar solos on it. The first one by Robert Fripp is like really heavily processed through a guitar synth. And then the second one is a very typical Adrian Belew guitar solo, which has, lots of sound effects. And, he was able to do these, animal noises with his guitars and that sort of thing. But then you take the title track, Discipline, and what you really get there is two guitars interweaving and playing different patterns and playing even in different time signatures at the same time. And it's just really great, creating these polyrhythms. Yeah, two of my all-time favorite guitar players playing in the same band. Highly, highly recommended. King Crimson with Robert Fripp and Adrian Belew.
What a cracker of an opening. And there you go, prog. First one, tick. Reed Little from the Contrarians. What's your first guitar duo that you'd like to put a spotlight on?
Okay, well, I decided that I would just go with my gut as soon as you sent out the invitation. By the way, thank you for the invitation. Saying guitar duo, I went first to the 1970s, like Bicyclelegs was saying. Listen to a lot of one guitar bands from the 70s, but for me, the 1970s guitar duo is Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter. Now, these guys are mostly known as studio guys or live players, and maybe not as much on album, but they were kind of like the go-to guys for Bob Ezrin. So when Bob is recording with Aerosmith and he needs some guitars, he gets Dick and Steve. When he's recording with Kiss and he needs some guitars, he gets Dick and Steve. When he's recording with Alice Cooper and he needs guitars, he gets Dick and Steve. You have heard Dick and Steve even if you don't know that you've heard them, because they had to play uncredited on a lot of albums. But more than that, they went to work for Lou Reed first recording an album, Berlin, and then doing his live album, which was, I always get the title of this wrong, so I've got it on my screen here, Rock and Roll Animal in 1974. It's the best Lou Reed has ever sounded, which is why, like, Lou Reed purists hate it because it sounds so professional. It's so arena rock. It is so not Lou Reed. Lou Reed later, he was like, I can't believe how professional these guys made me sound. So his whole band up and went to work for Alice Cooper, starting with Welcome to My Nightmare. And they did the Welcome to My Nightmare tour and Alice Goes to Hell and all of these other albums. But they were known to just have a telepathic connection when they were on stage. And they had very different guitar styles. Steve Hunter being very blues-based and Dick Wagner being a little more experimental. There's a little more jazz in his playing. But they could weave in and out of each other's lines with just listening, no communication other than just listening to each other play. They were the duo. Alice Cooper referred to them as the best guitarist he ever had. Now, of course, that was in the 70s. But they were like, he said, you know, if you have a band that just needs a guitar upgrade, you get Dick and Steve, and they just instantly elevate your product. So, like I said, you've heard them, even if you don't know you've heard them, but live is really where they shine. So if you get the Alice Cooper Welcome to My Nightmare video from 1974, I think, or you get Lou Reed's Rock and Roll Animals, or there's another, I'm so sorry, I can't remember album titles. The Alice Cooper Show was a live album that they both play on. And they are just amazing guitar players live. And like a lot of players from the 70s and the 1980s, they were out of fashion. And they did some work, but not nearly as much. But then about 1990, once retro was in, they took off again and had great careers for the rest of the 90s and the 2000s. Of course, Dick Wagner is now gone. Steve Hunter is still alive. But that is my first pick, Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter from the 70s.
That's an outstanding choice, Reed. And yeah, their influences all over the 70s, that style of guitar work. No, excellent choice. Mr. Parish of Rock, what have you got for us, your first pick?
Okay, well, I've decided for my first pick, I'm going to go with a duo that very rarely get talked about as guitar duos. In fact, most people probably, if they think of them at all, think the band is a single guitarist. They are also one of the most influential bands ever, I would suggest, with punk, new wave, grunge, heavy rock and Britpop artists all citing these guitarists as being major influences on them. They were the first band to make an impact on my life and the first dual guitarist to make an impact on my life. It's Dave Hill and Noddy Holder from Slade. Now, they don't get a lot of credit for being guitarists. I think that's partly because of Dave Hill's dodgy fringe, as you can see there. The fact he used to stomp around on stage on high heels. And Noddy Holder is definitely thought of more as a vocalist than as a guitarist, that people don't really think of him as a guitarist. There's a great live shot of them on the back. And they were a great live band. And their style is actually very distinctive. What people don't appreciate is that Dave Hill was actually had his guitars handmade for him, and a bit like Brian May, he used the same custom-built guitar for all of their singles through the whole of the 70s. Not necessarily on the Top of the Pop clips, but certainly he says he used the same guitar throughout. And it was custom-made with a custom pickup and gave him the distinctive style. And he was the lead guitarist. I say he was because they've just finally stopped and playing and he's just retired. But the distinctive Slade style, the power chords, the riffs on songs like Take Me Back Home, Goodbye to Jane, Mama We're All Crazy Now, that's actually Noddy Holder. He played the riffs. He played the crunching guitars. And everybody thinks of him as his vocals, his very sort of gruff, heavy rock type vocals, very distinctive. And he played guitar very much like he sang in many ways, with that really basic sound to it. And Dave Hill, very flamboyant, again, a flamboyant guitarist. And just to back up the statements I made about the influences, the Ramones have cited them as an influence on them. This is Jerry Ramone saying that the Ramones were shaped by Slade's high-energy, straightforward guitar riffing. And then if I go to grunge, Nirvana, Slade style mixed heavy distortion with simple power chords that influenced Nirvana's sound. And then if you go to the 90s, Oasis, essentially Oasis were Slade of the 90s. So there you go, three quite different bands, heavily influenced by these two guitarists. Dave Hill, there's another great live shot of them at Reading Festival. Dave Hill, Noddy Holder, two, I think, fantastic guitarists.
Another excellent choice, Parish. It's undeniable the influence of Slade on heavy metal or hard rock, especially in the LA music scene or American music scene. So kudos for you to bringing that up. No, excellent choice. Brandon, what's your pick for a guitar duos?
All right, I'm going to get a little more heavy with some of these picks, and this is a band, my favorite active band currently, and there's so many lead guitars I can choose for this, but I have to go with Dave Mustaine and Marty Friedman. I think this duo was just unstoppable. I think Rust in Peace is one of the greatest metal records ever recorded, ever, and written. And you look at songs like Five Magics, Rust in Peace, Holy Wars, just so unstoppable. Dave has this very aggressive stylings when it comes to his riffage and just writing in general, where Marty brought in these really amazing melodic solos to the band, and it just works so well. It's just such a great yin and yang from his, approach to songwriting and Dave's. It really makes the band. And I feel like Marty Friedman is one of the key members for Megadeth. And without him, who knows what the band could have been. Chris Poland had some demos for Rust in Peace, and hearing those demos compared to Marty, it's wow, Marty made this record. As much as I love Chris Poland, I think Marty Friedman is amazing. Countdown to Extinction, Euthanasia. He was also on Euthanasia. He did tracks 1, 10, and 11. And yeah, I Thought I Knew It All. Black Curtains is amazing. Reckoning Day, I think, has amazing soloing as well. He was in this band Hawaii before in the 80s, where it's funny, right before he joined Megadeth, he looked like, a glam guy. He had the dyed pink hair and everything, and he just did not look the part. But it just goes to show, I feel like, since Dave took a chance with Marty, it just paid off. It's just because it's not this aggressive Slayer-esque songwriting doesn't mean it's going to make bad metal. The solo for She-Wolf, one of the greatest metal solos, Hangar 18, especially when they're trading off solos, and it just works so well. It doesn't sound like it's oil and water. It's these two weird forces mixing, especially with how different their backgrounds were in the metal genre. But wow, he really helped to make Rust in Peace one of the greatest metal records of all time. And Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine are going to be my first pick.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I think a lot of folk would say that's the quintessential lineup of Megadeth, and the tasty melodic lines of those two guitarists. Wonderful, wonderful. John the Music Nut, welcome to the show. I'll get your pick in a moment. So we're just going through the first round of picks for the our favourite guitar duos. So, Mr. Mike Ladano, what have you got?
Thank you, Peter. Well, somebody had to do the obvious one, and since I am in the middle of 50 years of Iron Maiden right now, it kind of makes sense. Somebody had to talk about Adrian Smith and Dave Murray. And 1984 was the year that I got into Iron Maiden. It was actually what I would call a life-changing event. I've talked about it and written about it before. I won't go into details, but it was December 26th, 1984, when I first heard Iron Maiden, and it changed the trajectory of my life. So there's that. Adrian Smith and Dave Murray, one of the reasons I love these two guys is because, I mean, I'm no musician, but for these two guys, they're one of the only guitar duos where I can really definitively always tell which guy is playing the solo, whether it's Davey or Adrian. They have such distinct styles, and they're so complementary to one another. Adrian's solos are much more constructed. They're thought out. They are almost like mini compositions unto themselves. They have little dramatic sections where they slow down and then they go into something a little bit more upbeat and melodic and then they just rip, you know, and I'm thinking of something like Stranger in a Strange Land, for example, or Power Slave. Those guitar solos are incredible. And then Davey comes in and he throws on some wah-wah and he goes a little bit more bonkers. And I love that blend. And of course, when you get the two guys together harmonizing, that's a very, very unique sound. And I think Iron Maiden took what Thin Lizzy did with Robbo and Scott, and they turned it up to the metal level, you know? Granted, Thin Lizzy did go there on Thunder and Lightning, but I think Iron Maiden took that Lizzy template and took it to their own style of metal, you know? Lizzy, you wouldn't really call them a metal band except on a few of the albums. Iron Maiden is definitely a metal band. There's absolutely no question. And when you think, if somebody said to you, name 5 guitar duos, you've got 5 seconds. I think one of the first in that 5 would be Smith and Dave Murray. I think it would have to be. And, you know, this lineup was together from Killers 1981 to Seventh Son 1988. And when Adrian left, as much as I defend Yannick throughout the series, people have been giving Yannick crap, and I hate that. As much as I defend Yannick, they lost a key component when they lost Adrian. And his style of guitar solo, now that he's back in the band, is back, you know? Of course, it's a 3-guitar lineup, so it's excluded from this list. But that style that Adrian throws in there, it's back and it complements Davey so well. It's like, to use a cliche, peanut butter and jam, you know? So somebody had to say Iron Maiden, and I'm glad it was me.
Yeah, and the survey says Iron Maiden. Yeah, look, thank you for picking that. And incidentally, Iron Maiden are coming out to Australia, supported by Megadeth. And I believe, Brandon, they're doing a tour of America, both of them. So that's an interesting lineup. So looking forward to seeing them later this year. John the Music Nut, what's your first pick?
Okay, thanks for having me. My first pick is Duane Allman and Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers Band. It's interesting that a lot of the picks that we're making are bands where these guitarists were only together for a short amount of time or a few albums. And that was the case with Duane and Dickie because Duane died in a motorcycle accident in 1971. So we only got to hear these guys, but besides Archival projects, on the self-titled debut, Idlewild South, Eat a Peach, which is half live and half studio, and at Fillmore East, the seminal live album. The thing that really worked with Dickie and Duane was they were both fantastic guitar players, but they had different kinds of styles. Like Dickie was more into jazz, and then later on he was more into country, where with Duane, he was more of a blues guitar player, but together they made magic together. They were great whether they were playing unison guitar lines on a song like Hot Atlanta, which is a wonderful track from Fillmore East, or if they were doing these wonderful instrumentals. Well, Hot Atlanta is an instrumental, but songs like Statesboro Blues, you had that great slide playing from Dwayne on there, where you had Dickie playing more of a complementary role. But with their instrumentals, they were always working off together. Sometimes the lines were unison lines. A song like Midnight Rider, it was more acoustic, but then you'd have the electric solo that worked very, very well. A cover of Hoochie Coochie Man, which they went and completely rearranged from the original, sounded very strong. As time went on, Dickie became more of a writer, and in addition, so you were getting these wonderful jazz instrumentals in addition to these songs that were more blues, and they were covering a lot of great blues songs. But you had Whipping Post, which was a monster live because some of those unison guitar lines and the telepathy between the two of them was excellent. And we didn't get them very long, but what they gave us was magnificent. And At Fillmore East is one of the great live albums in rock and roll history, in my opinion. You had the great covers of Stormy Monday, and you had And You Don't Love Me was a cover, but they took it to 19 and a half minutes, and they went and they really stretched that out. You had a lot of times where it was just the guitars playing, where there was just a sparse rhythm behind it. So that's my first choice. It's Dwayne Allman and Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers. And the thing is, Dwayne passed on, and then later on, Dickie was handling all the guitar players, and he had Dan Toller next to him, and he had Warren Haynes there. And you had great tandems throughout the Allman Brothers' lifetime, but I don't think they quite touched that magic that you had with Dwayne and Dickie. So that's my pick.
No, good stuff, John. I think they set the blueprint or the template for guitar duos for the rest of the 70s, and so influential. The ultimate jam band. So no, that's a great pick. My pick, to those who know me, is probably going to be not unsurprising. These two guitarists were, in my opinion, in one of Britain's greatest hard rock blues bands of the 70s and 80s and beyond, fronted by one of my favorite vocalists of all time who recently retired. And these two guitarists produce blissful dual lead harmonies with a deep blues foundation. And I'm talking about Mr. Bernie Marsden and Mick Moody. And the band is Whitesnake. That's live in the heart of the city. So when I think of my favorite guitar duos, I think of ones that have chemistry, because there were so many guitarists in Whitesnake, but not all of them had chemistry, especially in the later period of my where they had the shredders. To me, the shredders were just playing for themselves a little bit. You know, it was fun to listen to, but in respect of chemistry, in respect of camaraderie, I got the sense of the feeling that they were actually part of the band. And Bernie Marsden and Mick Moody were part of the band. Bernie Marsden, he played the Gibson Les Paul with a tone that actually B.B. King said it stopped me in my tracks. His solos were bright, melodic. You could actually sing to them. Inventive, that went beyond the basic blues structure. Here I Go Again, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, Fool for Your Loving are some of his guitar highlights. Listen to his guitar work on Deep Purple, Mistreated. On Live in the Heart of the City. It's just fantastic. Mickey Moody was the perfect counterpoint to Marsden. He also played the Gibson. He was the band's slide player, directly out of the world of Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf, with his Belgian tom hat. Roaming the stage, he had Menace and Bite, Love Hunter, Walking in the Shadow of the Blues. Coverdale had the intention of creating a band that modelled the Allman Brothers. Maybe he did not achieve quite what he was after, but it did bring a blues sensibility to the masses through the wonderful pairing of Bernie Marsden and Mick Moody. In my opinion, these were hands down the best pairing in the band, as they did not operate as individuals, but as a team. So here's to you, Bernie Marsden and Mick Moody. I think they are the greatest guitar duo in Whitesnake, and they perfectly complemented the great vocals of one Mr. David Coverdale. All right. Bicylelegs, what's your number 2 pick?
Okay, Peter, I think it's time for us to bring a little bit of Australia to this discussion. And I'm going with one of my all-time favourite Australian bands, which I wish were known outside of Australia, but they're just really not. And, one of the most successful Australian bands of the 70s. I think Peter knows where I'm going with this. I am talking about Red Simons and Bob Bongo Starkey from Skyhooks. I love their guitar interplay on these first. Again, they weren't together for long. They were really only on the first 3 albums, and then Red left the band. He was replaced by another very good guitar player called Bob Spencer, but I never thought the chemistry between the 2 guitar players was quite the same between the 2 Bobs as it was between Bob Starkey and Red Simons, because Red Simons is a really idiosyncratic player. He has a very much a style that I don't think sounds like anybody else. And you get a lot of guitar interplay on these records. You get a lot of weaving between, you get some sort of that unison playing that we've been talking about. You get some of that harmony playing sort of riffs. And then sometimes you get the 2 riffs that weave together like this. And that's wonderful. Red did a lot of the soloing, but not all of it. Sometimes Bob would take a solo as well. This is wonderful sort of glam rock. It's a bit hard rock. They had a great look, as well as some absolutely... Greg McCainch is their bass player. That's the guy in the white tuxedo there. And he was the main songwriter, and he wrote witty, sharp songs about Australia, which Australian bands really hadn't done before. Australian bands had written songs about America and Route 66 and stuff like that. Greg McCainch was the first one in a rock and roll setting to really write songs about Melbourne and Sydney and Australia and things like that, but just all backed up with these wonderful twin guitars of Red Simons and Bob Starkey. And very sadly, just earlier this year, we lost Bob Starkey to leukemia. So rest in peace, Bob Starkey. We love you. Absolutely a band you guys should check out if you don't know Skyhooks. And this is as good a place as any to start. Living in the 70s, which is their debut album from 1974.
Cracker of a band and great album. When I appeared on Sea of Tranquility, it must be 3 years ago, the show was about bands that big in their home country but unknown overseas. And Pete Pardo never heard of Skyhooks, or any on the panel had not heard of Skyhooks. I think they did a couple of tours of America, ill-fated tours supporting Foghat and Uriah Heep, go figure, and was not successful at all. So they were sort of regarded as glammy. I said in the show, and I know you probably disagree with me, Bicylelegs, but their guitar sound was very similar to those guitarists that Reed was talking to in Alice Cooper Band.
No, I agree.
Yeah. So it's sort of in that ballpark. But look, investigate it. It's one of Australia's greatest rock albums, living in the 70s, Skyhooks. Well recommended. Reed Little, what's your next pick?
Okay. Well, I was going to do Dave Mustaine and Marty Friedman, but the world of guitars is very big, so I'm calling an audible, but that's kind of requiring me to go with one of my go-tos. So one of the internet, the YouTube's favorite bands, when we do videos about their albums, they always get a lot of views, is Kiss. And infamously, for me, there's only one pair of guitarists in Kiss that rule the roost, and that is Paul Stanley and Bruce Kulick. And here's what makes Bruce so amazing. The other day I sat down and I still listen to Kiss on a regular basis. And I listened to Alive, and I listened to Alive 2, and I listened to Alive 3. Now, Alive 3 was recorded like 20 years later. The early iteration of Kiss is a very primitive group. Now, they were somewhat proficient, but they weren't that great of songwriters yet. They were really learning their craft as they went. I don't hold that against anybody. I mean, that's everybody when they make their first album. They're just learning. But they were very much a Rolling Stones kind of band. They wanted to be, Paul Stanley said, yeah, we wanted to be Led Zeppelin, but we weren't that talented. So we were shooting for the Rolling Stones, right? By the time they get to the 80s, you know, that 70s sound was instant death. That's just how it works in the music business. There's this constant evolution. Every 4 to 6 years, you've got to have a new sound because you got new kids coming up. They don't want to listen to the old music. So they adapt and they get a shredder. They get a shredder in Vinnie Vincent. They get an uncontrollable shredder in Vinnie Vincent who won't stop playing, so they kick him out of the band. They get another shredder. He's too shreddy in Mark St. John. He's so... Joe B described him as a bumblebee. He's just all over the place. He's out of the band. And they bring in Bruce. And what makes Bruce so amazing, well, first let me say, Paul Stanley does not get enough credit as a guitar player because he grew and he learned and he got so much better over the course of their career. By the time he's playing on Dynasty and Unmasked, he's playing like Steve Lukather. He's doing these wonderful melodic lines that are just, you know, light years away from doing the Keith Richards, which is what they did on the first 3 albums. So he's growing. He's becoming better. When they move into the 80s, they're just straight up hair metal. And here's the thing. Kiss was hair metal in the 70s. So there wasn't really a long way for them to go other than to raise the speed and raise the technicality. Now, obviously, Vinnie Vincent had the speed and he had the technicality. Mark St. John had the speed and the technicality, but they didn't stick around because they couldn't do the old material the way that Gene and Paul wanted to do the old material. Bruce, having grown up in the 70s, having played with Meatloaf, being that arena rock background, he can do Ace better than Ace ever did Ace, or he can shred when it's required to be the 80s. And I still say people give Crazy Nights a lot of flack, but listen to the solos on that album. They're freaking brilliant. It may have been poppy. It may have been produced like a Heart album, but the guitars on that album are insane. They are great. So Bruce could instantly go from that 80s shredder to that 1970s rock and roll guy, like instantaneously. And when Kiss are live, you know, most of the time, Paul does play, but he plays about 25%, and the rest of it is dancing around the stage, waving his finger at the audience and being the rock and roll preacher. So there's a lot of weight on the second guitar player in Kiss, and Bruce was absolutely able to do that. He did it all through the 80s, and honestly, I wish they would have continued with him. Although, you know, I've got nothing against Tommy Thayer, but I don't think Tommy brings the range into Kiss. He was hired to be the second Ace, and, you know, he's a great guitar player, but he was not allowed to be himself, whereas Bruce got to be himself, and he's awesome.
Great pick there, Reed, and I think very underrated, that lineup of Kiss in the 80s. So thank you for getting the champagne out, popping the cork, and celebrating. Parish of Rock, what have you got for your number 2 pick?
Okay, well, I thought I'd go, having gone to the 70s, I'd come a little bit more modern. So I'm going with a band from the 21st century. Their first album was still 21 years ago, so maybe not that modern. Heavy rock band, a band which have a history before this band, and I'm going with Alter Bridge and their guitarists Miles Kennedy and Mark Tremonti. So Mark Tremonti and the drummer and bassist were Creed. I think Mark Tremonti doesn't get credit as the guitarist that he is because of the association with Creed. And yet in Alter Bridge, he is an absolutely killer guitarist. The songs are epic, they're heavy, they're melodic. It's definitely heavy rock, even heavy metal for the modern era. and he's crunching. His influences are AC/DC, Metallica, Iron Maiden, and Van Halen. So he's kind of got that sonics to it, but he is a rhythm guitarist, even though he was the only guitarist in Creed, and the only guitarist I think in his solo project Tremonti. But in Alter Bridge, he's the rhythm guitarist, and then he's paired up with Miles Kennedy, who's the vocalist, a bit like Slade. It's often forgotten that Miles Kennedy is also a guitarist, because of the strength of his vocals. But he's the lead guitarist, and he's actually a jazz guitarist by training. So he's bringing this technical jazz blues sound into it, which is very different to Mark Tremonti's, and yet it works. It just comes together really well, and you get a lot of acoustics, particularly at the beginning, which is all Miles Kennedy. And when you watch them on stage, the interaction between the two of them, the chemistry, the friendship between them is just remarkable. And the reason I picked them is because I saw them live just over a week ago, and I wasn't going to go with them. I was going to go with another band, which I might pick as an honourable mention if we get a chance. But when I saw them live, I thought, how can I not talk about these two guys? They're fantastic. And just to kind of support the emphasis of how good they are as dual guitarists, they've got a song off their second album, Blackbird is the album, and Blackbird the title track. And that song in 2011 was voted by the readers of Guitarist magazine as the best guitar solo ever, outbeating the likes of Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Dave Gilmour, Steve Vai, Slash, Eddie Van Halen, which were others that were in the top 10. But number one by guitar player readers was Blackbird. And then just this year, Planet Rock, which is a radio station in the UK, they had a poll of people's favourite rock songs ever. The only song from the 21st century in the top 50 was Blackbird at number 8. So two places where people voted for the song. Number 1 for Guitarist magazine as the top solo, and number 8 as the best rock song ever, at number 8 of that poll. So I just think that underpins how good they are as guitarists. And I have to say, one of the strengths of the song is there's 2 guitar solos, one after the other, Mark Tremonti's and then Miles Kennedy's, and they're so different, and yet it just flows so brilliantly between the two of them. They're just outstanding, just absolutely outstanding. And in the UK, just recently, they've just done an arena tour, which I have to say wasn't quite sold out, but was probably 90% sold out. So 20,000 venue, I would say probably 15 to 18,000 there. And they just played the whole of the UK at that kind of size venue. So they're certainly a big deal over here. I'm not sure how big a deal, and across Europe, I don't know how big a deal they are elsewhere, but as guitarists, absolutely fantastic. So that's my second pick. Miles Kennedy, Mark Tremonti of Alter Bridge.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Look, I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with Alter Bridge, but I am familiar that Miles has got an outstanding voice. So hearing that, I'm a little surprised, and I'll definitely have to check out some of their stuff. So appreciate that.
And it might not mean much, depends what you think of him as a guitarist, but Slash says says that Miles Kennedy's the best guitarist he's ever played with.
Right. Okay. There you go. All right, Brandon, what's your next pick?
Okay, so I'm going to keep going with the heavy metal because obviously it's the genre I'm into. And I'm going to have to go with Merciful Fate. This has some amazing guitar playing. Michael Denner, Hank Sherman, Michael has this more like technical side to his playing, just super technical in his soloing. where Hank Sherman, it's like these super aggressive riffs, and there's such a great emphasis on like darkness and moodiness and atmosphere with his riffage. You know, he understands what kind of band he's writing riffs for. But at the same time, you know, you look at an album like Melissa, all right, and it's like Satan's Fall, for example, where it's just riff after riff after riff after riff, and so many moving parts to a song like that. And I feel like both of them keep up with each other because both are so impressive with just how great of guitar players they are. And it's like you hear a riff, and this one little 30-second riff, you know, other bands from the 80s in heavy metal would kill for just that snippet of a riff, and they would probably center a whole song around it. Where when it comes to Merciful Fate, Hank Sherman is throwing like 20 of those at one song, and it's just fantastic. It's very fantastic. Actually, I believe Ghost, maybe not on purpose, but did steal a riff on Opus for the song, the first song on the album, whatever. But there's literally that riff is in Satan's Fall for a second, and then it went off to just be turned into a song on its own. It just goes to show how great of not only writers but players these guys are. But there's so many twists and turns with music like this, and I just feel like I was saying before, not only are they able to keep up with each other, but they're both just on the same wavelength. Exactly. The solos always reflect the riffage so well. And even during the evolution of this band's career, you see Time, which is a lot more different than an album like Melissa, where still they maintain that connection, that chemistry of understanding exactly what they want the song to sound like. You look at Angel of Light, Witch's Dance, The Mad Arab, My Demon. Time is one of the most underrated records, metal records, in my opinion, from '94. And it's just this duo was just insanely good. They ended up later doing stuff after Merciful Fate. And again, very similar to Merciful Fate. Sometimes it's like, this could have just been a Merciful Fate song, but still, they know exactly what kind of music they want, and their style is just so like obvious. It's not just, oh, it's Shredder number 80. It's like, no, this is Merciful Fate. This is the sound of the band. One of the most iconic bands instrumentally. Of course, King Diamond is legendary, but I have to admit the instrumentals, Don't Break the Oath, Melissa, Time, which were, you know, I believe they only did 5 records together, which I would have loved to see them do another Merciful Fate album. I know there's a new album coming out by them, and I really would love them to return, because some of the greatest metal instrumentally has been by this guitar duo. Michael Denner, Hank Sherman, Merciful Fate, one of my favorite bands of all time. That's going to be my second pick.
Fantastic pick. And King Diamond, it's been too long, mate. Get something out. It's been way too long. Look, I think King has surrounded him with great guitarists, and the bands King Diamond and Merciful Fate, their musicianship is just out of control. It's just so outworldly. So that's a fantastic pick, Brandon. Thank you for that. Mike, what's your next pick?
Well, this next pick ticks off a couple of boxes that we've talked about already, one of which is a band from one country that didn't seem to really, take off in other countries, that being Canada. And actually from my own hometown of Kitchener, Ontario, is where they were based out of during the glory years, the EMI years. But I'm talking about Helix. And the other box that this checks off is, unfortunately, a limited time span for this particular lineup. Guitarist Brent the Doctor Durner and Paul Hackman were a team by about 1975. Helix had a keyboard player before then by the name of Don Simmons. And in a weird twist of fate, I actually own a bass owned by Don Simmons. It turns out that my family are friends. But they went with a dual guitar lineup by 1975. And in 79, I believe, they released their first independent album, Breaking Loose, on their own label, H&S Records, which is like in Canada, some of the first independent releases. They did 2 independent releases. And Brent and Paul Hackman were the guitar duo, and they were kind of forming their sound on these early records. But by the time they signed with EMI and they did No Rest for the Wicked, that was when their sound had really solidified. And you get a lot of that dual guitar harmony stuff that a lot of good metal bands were doing at that time. For example, they had a hit called Gimme Gimme Good Lovin' from the Walkin' the Razor's Edge album. And they're just a very catchy kind of Thin Lizzy melody with the two guitar players doing it obviously better than me in perfect harmony. And then they would break into solos, and much like my other band that I mentioned, Iron Maiden, you had 2 guitar soloists that kind of had their own styles. Paul Hackman was very much sort of a hard rock guitar player, and Brent Durner tended to go outside the box a little bit with jazzy licks and bluesy licks and things like that. Brent Durner also did lead vocals on the first 2 albums. I suspect that what happened was when they signed with EMI, I think probably somebody said, listen, enough with the bar band switching lead vocal stuff. One vocalist is what I'm thinking, have a front man. But Brent Durner there on my right, and Paul Hackman next to him, did these 2 more albums, Wild in the Streets and Long Way to Heaven, both of which featured big hits in Canada. Wild in the Streets was a big hit. There was a ballad called Deep Cuts the Knife that Paul Hackman wrote that was a big hit in Canada. But unfortunately, by 1989, Brent Durner sort of decided that music wasn't really working out for him, and he quit music temporarily to become a carpenter. And did very well for himself, and they carried on as a quartet, and then they added other guitar players. But really in 1989 is when it ended, and I don't think the band ever recovered from Brent Durner leaving, because they never had like a solid 5-man lineup that was like the lineup ever again. So they had this span from about 1975 to about 1989 where they had these 2 great guitar players, and they received a little bit of recognition in magazines like Hit Parader. You'd see, a Helix article once every year or 2. But unfortunately, the sad ending to this story is that in 1992, and I'll never forget this, I was at the cottage and I was watching the local news on TV, and they said, up next, Helix. And I was like, uh-oh, why are Helix on the news? That's not good news. And it was because they were on a Western Canadian tour, and their van, much like Cliff Burton, they had an accident, and I don't think Paul Hackman was wearing a seatbelt. He was sleeping in the van, and he was killed. And prematurely, that they had a lot of records left in them, I think, with Paul. He was a fierce songwriter. He was a great song. In fact, Helix came out with an album this year, 2026. I would say a good solid, 5 to 7 of the songs were co-written by Paul Hackman. So they're still mining those old tunes that he wrote but never released before he died. So I think that these 2 guys, Paul Hackman and Brent Durner, they're very underappreciated. Brent he's a friend of mine now. I'm happy to say he lives locally. He lives right by my house, and he's a cool guy. And I think if things had gone a little bit differently for Helix, I think we'd be talking about them in the same sentences as bands like maybe Rat or Quiet Riot. But unfortunately, aside from Rock You, which really they didn't write it, and it's not really that much of a song. It's just a chant, really. Aside from that, they're not really remembered. And that's unfortunate, because I think this band really deserved more. They are still going today in 2026, but it's sort of a fluctuating lineup. Different guys on the albums versus what you see live. And that period, though, these albums that I have here that I've shown you, if you can get your hands on any one of these, or a great EMI Greatest Hits album called Over 60 Minutes with Helix, you will be doing just fine. So check them out. Check out some Helix.
Thank you, Mike. Unknown in Australia and other parts of the world, I think. So it's always good to champion a band that should have done much bigger. And I think check out the Rock Candy label. There's a lot of good stuff on that label. John the Music Nut, what's your next pick?
Okay, so I was late to the party. I'm gathering this band was mentioned. No?
No.
Wow. The way y'all were talking, I figured you already talked about.
No, we knew you were going to pick it, so that's why we left it for you.
Well, that was very kind of you all. I appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham from Thin Lizzy. And they started out on the Nightlife album, which is a mellower album by the band, but it's a wonderful one. And you have a lot of great interplay on here. And this would go right through their wonderful live album called Live and Dangerous. Now, the thing with Thin Lizzy, and Wishbone Ash had done it before them, and the Allman Brothers Band, who I talked about earlier, done that as well. They were wonderful with their unison guitar playing. On an album like Nightlife, you don't have too much of it because it's more of a mellower album. But if you listen to a song like Philomena, you got wonderful unison guitar lines on there, and you got very tasteful guitar lines on mellower tracks like Showdown, or She Knows the acoustic guitars that work very, very well. But as they would go on, as a lot of us would know, they would become more of a hard rock band. Wonderful guitar interplay on Fighting, which was their next album. The twin guitar lines on Wild One are fantastic. If you want to hear something ripping, just kicks your butt. Fighting My Way Back, those riffs are fantastic. Suicide, that's very, very heavy. And then when we mellow out a little bit on Spirit Slips Away, those unison guitar lines work very, very well. Of course, their U.S. breakthrough, Jailbreak, which was their only album to certify in the States. We have wonderful unison guitar playing, of course, on their biggest hit, their worldwide hit, The Boys Are Back in Town. But you also have wonderful guitar playing on Warriors, Emerald, those very, very heavy, but those unison guitar lines and those trading off of solos at the end of the track are awesome. And then Johnny the Fox came later on in 76 because they couldn't tour because Phil had gotten hepatitis, but he kept on writing. And then you had wicked guitar playing on Massacre and Don't Believe a Word. And then the ballads, you had wonderful guitar playing on Old Flame and Sweet Marie. Excellent. But their guitar, they gelled very, very well. And then the last album, studio album they played on together, but only 3 tracks feature both of them, was Bad Reputation. But if you listen to those unison guitar lines on That Woman's Gonna Break Your Heart, they're masterful, even though that song is led by acoustic guitars, strummed guitars. Opium Trail, Heavy as Sin, wicked playing on there. And then, of course, Live and Dangerous, magnificent. One of the best double live albums ever released in rock, in my opinion. But so much great guitar playing on there, on Cowboy Song and Sha La La, and even a song like Dance in the Moonlight, which is mellower, more R&B. You still got some tasteful guitar playing. And of course, on something funkier like Johnny the Fox meets Jimmy the Wheat. So their time together was short. Brian Robertson, he was like in and out of the band because of the stuff he was doing outside of the band. But those 4 years that those guys were together were magical. And to me, my favorite period of Thin Lizzy. And again, we get Snowy White. We'd have Gary Moore for a little bit. We actually had him twice. And Snowy White and then John Sykes. All fantastic players in their own rights. But it was that duo of Brian and Scott that worked very well.
Yeah, there was sort of like a telepathy between those two. Just the musical chemistry was just palpable. Look, I knew you were going to pick it. Honestly, I did deep down, and I would have chosen. They were like, if it was a Family Feud, that would be like, right up in the top 5. Great lineup, fantastic. Absolutely. Well done. Bicylelegs. I was a little bit worried because when you were talking Skyhooks, I thought, oh shit, you're going to pick the band I'm about to pick because you're doing the slow build up. And I'm going to choose another Australian band that criminally underrated. They were known as a different name in America because there was another similar band name. And I'm talking about The Angels. So this is their live album, Live Line. They were known as Angel City or Angels from Angel City in America. They're a big influence to Guns N' Roses, Skid Row, Great White covered their songs. They had an influence, but, outside Australian, they were sort of relatively unknown. They were, to me, the sound of Australian pub rock, that real crunchy guitar, the staccato, crunchy, chugga guitar sound. And it's the two guitarists that had the chemistry who were brothers, and that was Rick Brewster and John Brewster. So Rick Brewster was the lead guitarist. He remained stationary on stage, never smiled, showed no emotion, had the dark sunnies on. His presence loomed large, firing out machine gun riffs that were kind of textured. And then you had John Brewster, his brother, who was a little bit more animated. He was the rhythm player, but he probably single-handedly created the Aussie pub rock sound, in my opinion, with the staccato chugga pick playing that gave the band its energy, its urgency. It was almost punk-like, and he has said in interviews that he was very influenced by what was coming out of the UK in 77 with The Clash and those staccato, spiky type guitar playing. He was the yin to his brother's yang, weaving in and out and creating a sound that was full and complete and totally adrenalized. And then in the front of this band, you had one of Australia's greatest frontman, and should have been the world's greatest frontman if they just knew about him, Doc Neeson. He was sort of like a combination of a bit of Bon Scott meets Iggy Pop. He was just totally bonkers. He'd be climbing the Marshall stacks, or he'd be going into the crowd. He had a communication with the audience that only a few Australian frontmen, you probably could say Bon Scott, Michael Hutchins of NXS were, probably at that level. Signature songs, Marseille, Mr. Damage, Shadow Boxer, Am I Ever Gonna See Your Face Again? Look that up on YouTube. Outside Australia, bit of a nice call and response, you'll understand. They're one of the best live bands out of Australia, and for that matter, the world. Charismatic, but it's the two guitarists. It's, John Brewster and Rick Brewster that created that sound. And to me, they are the Angels, so check them out. They are one of my favourite guitar duos. So there we have it, guys. I love this. This has just been a whole world, a universe of different genres, and it just makes it really interesting. Now, I'm going to put everyone on the spot because I didn't say this, but let's, I'll go around the grounds and come up with maybe an honourable mention or two. I'll start things off. Judas Priest. Got to go KK and Glenn Tipton. Even though, you read stories later in the fact that they didn't get on and they weren't like best pals and buddies, but on stage, there was a chemistry. It's undeniable. And to me, Judas Priest is those two. So that's probably my honourable mention. Bicyclelegs, sorry, putting you on the spot. Have you got a...
No. I've got a couple. I had one that I had prepared in case somebody had already taken one of my other ones. There's Kansas, Rich Williams and Kerry Livgren. Great. I mean, just off this album, the one Kansas song everybody knows is Carry On Wayward Son. And in the middle of that, there are a pair of guitar solos, one from Rich Williams, one from Kerry Livgren, and they are absolutely fabulous. And then very, very quickly, from the world of post-punk, Dave Gregory and Andy Partridge from XTC. Just absolutely wonderful pair of guitar players, both with their own style. Dave Gregory very much more technical, more musicianly, whereas Andy Partridge was a little more primitivist, a little more brutal, but still very, very effective guitar player. So, yeah, those are a couple of quick honourable mentions.
Excellent. Reed, you got an honourable mention?
Yeah, I got a couple. Of course, the very first guitar duo I was ever really into got to be the Beatles, John Lennon and George Harrison.
Of course.
They were just sublime. And again, they were learning their trade as they went. John Lennon was known for he would learn a new chord and just go into the studio and say, hey, I learned this chord. We're going to write a song using it. And, that's pretty cool. And of course, one thing I love about these bands is you can just hear them getting better and better over time. My other pick, if I were going to go heavy metal, I'm going thrash, because thrash was my jam back in the late 80s. And I'm going Testament with Eric Peterson and Alex Skolnick. Eric was a riffer, and you're talking about very different guys. Now, you're talking about people that started as teenagers. And even when he was 18 years old, Alex Skolnick was clearly head and shoulders above other players from the Bay Area. They didn't quite have the songwriting chops yet, but Eric was the riff guy. Now, he can solo now. At the time, I don't think, in a band with Alex, I don't think he had a lot of space. But over the course of about 4 albums, they diverged completely. Alex went off to become a jazz player. Eric became more of a death metal player. And then now in the 21st century, they've reconvened, and the two of them really meld well. All of that experience under their belts, and they're still some of the best thrashers out there.
Great picks. Fantastic. Parish.
One of my honourable mentions is the band I nearly went with until I saw Alter Bridge last week, and that was The Darkness. So that would be Dan Hawkins, who's the main guitarist, a lot of the rhythm, and they play anything from very heavy metal all the way to the most poppy rock that you could think of, like I Believe in a Thing Called Love. But Justin Hawkins, who's the vocalist and certainly in the UK quite a celebrity, is also a guitarist, and he plays a lot of sort of virtuoso soloing over the top of Dan's riffing. So I nearly went with them, but as I say, went with Alter Bridge. And my other honourable mention, which I didn't go with because I thought somebody else was going to go with, so I'm pleased that I can actually mention them because they're probably my two favourite guitarists of all time, and that's Angus and Malcolm Young, and I don't need to say any more.
I feel so stupid. There's so many good picks. Why did I pick AC/DC? Oh, Brandon, can you rectify this? What's your next pick?
Yeah, this next pick is a band that I've at times wanted to carve their logo into my arm. Slayer. Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman, just excellent. You know, a lot of people don't understand, like, Jeff did so much for Slayer. A lot of the lyrics, the war themes, all come from Jeff. And Kerry King is just perfect with Jeff, just the perfect pair up. Since how chaotic he's soloing it. It sounds like literal warfare. And so paired with Jeff's riffage style, it just fits so amazingly. Also, Jeff's just ability to create atmosphere with just so few notes. You look at a song like Dead Skin Mask, and it's like, wow, this song, it's, Slayer, it's not just thrash, let's go, dial it to 11 and just go as fast as possible. A song like Dead Skin Mask, and there's many others, of course, but a song like that specifically just goes to show it's like this guy knew how to write music and how to embody lyrics. That's what's really hard, I find, with music, is like not just writing a song and then pasting random lyrics over it, but having the lyrics actually reflect the music. And Jeff and Kerry were just a master at that. I'm going to have to go with Slayer and Dave Mustaine and James Hetfield. I know that I'm a bit of a Megadeth fanboy, but James, one of the best like down picker rhythm sections in thrash, and Dave Mustaine, that pair. Just look at in 2000, I think it was 12 or 13, they reunited and they did Phantom Lord and a few other songs, and it's like, damn, like if Dave stayed with Metallica, this could have been, who knows, but there's no way he would have survived past Injustice. But I think Dave and James were just like the two of them. They were too good to keep together, but those are my honorable mentions.
Well, I hope Dave's not watching this show because it'll probably trigger him This Metallica thing's been going on for some time. Love the Slayer. To me, it's like metal jazz. The chords and the notes just interweaving. Masterful. Mike Ladano.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to correct myself. I kept saying EMI. It was actually Capital that signed Helix. So correction on that. I tend to use the term interchangeably, which isn't right. My first runner-up is from Saskatchewan, Canada, Kick-Axe, featuring Larry Gilstrom, the late Larry Gilstrom. We lost him to cancer last year, and Raymond Harvey on guitar. They did 3 albums on the Pasha label, same label as Quiet Riot in the 80s, before they basically folded due to lack of success and, the same old story. But Kick-Axe were a pretty good band, I think. They had a hit called On the Road to Rock. I'm sure none of you guys know it, but check it out on your YouTube if you want to hear some Larry Gilstrom and Raymond Harvey from Kick-Axe. My second pick, and I'm going to get crap for this, but when I was a kid and recording videos and concerts from television, there was a concert that ran called Live Without a Net, and it featured the guitar duo of Samuel Hagar and Edward Van Halen. Yes, they were a guitar duo at that point on the 5150 tour. Sammy had a lot of solos. He had a great solo on Love Walks In, because Eddie was playing the keyboards back then. He was actually playing the keyboards live back then. And Sammy did a lot of the solos. And Love Walks In was a great solo. It made me wish it was on the album. So there you go. Van Halen, guitar duo.
Are you sure that Tim Derling's not at the side of you and prompting you to say that?
I was thinking about Derling at that moment, but no, he's not. He's not with me.
You sure Derling's not behind you? Just checking. Oh, okay. No worries. All right. In joke, folks. Don't worry about it. John the Music Nut, what's your next pick? Honourable mention.
Okay. I'm going with Keith Richards and Mick Taylor from the Rolling Stones.
Thank God.
Got it. So this is where Mick Taylor made his debut on Let It Bleed. He didn't play on much of Let It Bleed, but this is where he made his debut. And I think this era, maybe even Beggar's Banquet, right through the last album that Mick played on, It's Only Rock and Roll. So we're talking a 6-year period here from 68 to 74. That's the meat and potatoes of the Stones catalog, is all the great music they made over the last 60 years or so. If you go to see them live, a lot of that set list is going to be from that period. And you had Let It Bleed, which was a fantastic album. Give Me Shelter, Midnight Rambler, You Can't Always Get What You Want. But then we got Sticky Fingers. They got a #1 hit with Brown Sugar. And to me, one of the great long guitar solos in rock and roll in Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which you have the magnificent sax solo from Bobby Keys, but then you have Mick with his long, very tasteful solo on here. But you got those great songs, and you got great acoustic songs like Wild Horses and Dead Flowers. And then we go into the seminal Exile on Main Street, which is a tour de force. I mean, a lot of it sounded like 50s rock and roll, and then you're having songs that sound a lot like old school country, and then you got great hits like Tumbling Dice and Happy, which is wonderful. Goat's Head Soup, we had Angie, Heartbreaker, Dancing with Mr. D, a lot of great tracks, and then It's Only Rock and Roll. Second of my favorite Rolling Stones guitar solos is on Time Waits for No One. This is a wonderful record. It just didn't really have the hits that the other ones had. So to me, yeah, Mick Taylor and Keith Richards, fantastic.
Thank God for saving the day, because I was going to chime in at the end. We've got to talk about the Rolling Stones, and in my opinion, and I will say to my dying breath, I think they had one of the greatest 4 or 5 album runs with that lineup in the annals of rock and roll.
Absolutely.
Thank you, lads. This has been enjoyable. We have covered all the genres of rock, and this has been a fantastic show. So thank you, Bicylelegs. Thank you, Mike Ladano. Thank you, Reed Little. Thank you, Parish of Rock. Thank you, Brandon Battick. And thank you, John the Music Nut. I will put your respective YouTube channels. Check it out. Folks, what are your favorite guitar duos? Put it down. Have we missed out? Did you, give us your picks? We love reading your comments. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. But I think I'm going to do another show with this group. This was a lot of fun. More to come in 2026. Keep watching Rock Daydream Nation. All the best and cheers.
Cheers, Peter.
Thank you.